Hey guys, Karenology here. This one is pure gold. Pettiness, drama, and an ending that will leave you speechless.
Looking at my 70-year-old hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee at 6 in the morning, I never thought I'd be sitting in a police station explaining why there was a bulldozer parked sideways across my driveway. But here I am, and let me tell you how a simple Tuesday morning turned my quiet retirement into a battlefield that would make my old Army buddies proud. The whole mess started with roses, my grandfather's roses, to be exact. The same roses that have been blooming in my front yard for 30 years. The ones my late wife Mary used to tend with the devotion of a monastery gardener. Those roses became the center of a war I never saw coming, against an enemy I underestimated, in a fight that would test everything I thought I knew about standing your ground. The morning it all began, I was doing what I do every day at dawn, watering Mary's roses with the old brass nozzles she bought at a garage sale in 1995. The early light was hitting the petals just right, making them glow like stained glass windows when I heard the rumble. Not the gentle purr of Mrs. Henderson's sedan, or the familiar wheeze of Tom's pickup truck. This was something bigger, angrier, like a metal beast with indigestion. I looked up from the pink blooms to see a black BMW SUV barreling down our quiet street, its chrome bumper catching the sunrise like a weapon. The vehicle didn't slow down as it approached my house. Instead, it jumped the curb with a sickening crunch and plowed straight across my carefully maintained lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass my grandfather had seeded with his own hands in 1965. Out of this automotive assault stepped Carol Miller, and I use the word stepped loosely because what she did was more like a military deployment. Carol was a woman who had clearly declared war on aging gracefully, bleached blonde hair shellacked into submission, a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, and the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no by anyone who couldn't fire her. She was maybe 48 years old, carrying an extra 40 pounds like body armor and wielding a manila folder like a general's baton. Behind her emerged three men in orange safety vests, carrying shovels and wearing the expressions of hired muscle who'd rather be anywhere else. "Franklin Wells," she announced, not asked, pointing one manicured finger at me like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup. "I'm Carol Miller from the County Assessor's Office, and you are in violation of Municipal Code 47B regarding unauthorized landscaping modifications." She opened her folder with the flourish of someone revealing evidence of war crimes. "This property has been flagged for immediate remediation due to non-compliant garden structures and historical taxation discrepancies." I stood there in my pajamas and bathrobe, brass nozzle still in my hand, water dripping onto my slippers, trying to process what was happening. Historical taxation discrepancies? I'd been paying my property taxes religiously for 40 years, ever since I inherited this house from my grandfather. Never missed a payment, never had a problem, never even received so much as a late notice. The garden structures she was talking about were the raised flower beds my grandfather had built in the 1950s using field stone he'd gathered from the creek that used to run behind our neighborhood before they developed it. Those beds had been photographed for the County Historical Society's newsletter just 2 years ago as examples of authentic mid-century residential landscaping. But Carol Miller was standing in my yard at 6:15 in the morning with a demolition crew, talking about violations like I was running some kind of illegal operation. "Ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and polite the way Mary always taught me, "I think there's been some kind of mistake. I've never received any notice about violations, and these flower beds have been here longer than some of the houses on this street." Carol's smile was the kind you see on sharks in nature documentaries, all teeth and predatory intent. The notice was published in the legal section of the county newspaper 3 weeks ago, as required by law. Failure to respond constitutes acknowledgement of guilt and waiver of appeal rights. What she didn't say, but what I learned later, was that the legal notice had been buried on page 17 of the county paper in 8-point font, between advertisements for bail bondsmen and auction notices for farm equipment. What she also didn't mention was that she'd been watching my house for weeks, timing my daily routines, learning my habits like a predator studies its prey, The workers she'd brought weren't county employees at all, but private contractors paid from what would turn out to be a very questionable emergency remediation fund that Carol Miller had considerable influence over. But standing there in my bathrobe, holding my watering nozzle like it was going to protect me from whatever legal tsunami was about to hit, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that a woman I'd never met was threatening to destroy the last physical connection I had to my grandfather and my wife. And she was doing it with the kind of bureaucratic confidence that suggested she'd done this before. These stone structures, Carol continued, walking over to the roses and running her hand along the weathered fieldstone border that my grandfather had laid stone by stone 60 years ago, are not in compliance with current landscaping ordinances. They present a drainage hazard and potential liability for the county in case of flooding. She gestured to her crew, and the man with the sledgehammer stepped forward. That's when something inside me shifted, like a gear clicking into place in an old engine that hadn't run for years. I moved between the worker and the flower bed, still holding my watering nozzle, and said in a voice that surprised even me, "Son, I'd advise you to step back from those roses." The young man, probably in his 20s with muscles that suggested he made his living with those tools, looked at me and then at Carol, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this was heading. "Sir," he said, "we're just following orders. We don't want any trouble." Carol stepped forward, her voice gaining that edge that comes from someone used to having their authority unchallenged. "Mr. Wells, you are interfering with a lawful county operation. These men have every right to be here, and you have no right to stop them. I suggest you step aside before this becomes a police matter." That's when I noticed Mrs. Patterson from across the street, standing on her porch in her house dress, watching the scene unfold. Then Mr. Jackson from 2 doors down appeared at his mailbox, pretending to check for mail that wouldn't be delivered for another 3 hours. Word travels fast in a neighborhood where the average age is north of 60, and the most exciting thing that usually happens is when someone gets a new mailbox. Within 10 minutes, I had an audience, and Carol Miller had exactly what she'd been hoping for. A public confrontation that would either break me or make me look like a crazy old man fighting City Hall. What I didn't realize yet was that this wasn't random bureaucratic harassment. This was personal, deliberate, and part of a plan that had been months in the making. Carol Miller had been researching my property, my family history, and my personal vulnerabilities with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operation. And she'd chosen this moment, this method, and this public setting for reasons I wouldn't understand until it was almost too late. Standing there in the growing morning light, surrounded by neighbors I'd known for decades, facing down a woman who seemed to have the full weight of county government behind her, I made a decision that would change everything. I looked at Carol Miller, at her hired crew, at the folder of official-looking documents, and I said something my grandfather used to say when he was backed into a corner during his days as a union organizer at the steel mill. "Ma'am, you picked the wrong fight with the wrong man on the wrong morning. But since you're here, let's dance." What happened next would test everything I thought I knew about justice, community, and how far a man will go to protect what he loves. But in that moment, holding my grandfather's brass watering nozzle while a stranger threatened to destroy my grandfather's roses, I felt more alive than I had since Mary's funeral 2 years ago. Sometimes a man doesn't know what he's made of until someone tries to take away everything that makes him who he is. Carol Miller's expression shifted from bureaucratic smugness to something harder, more calculating, and I realized I'd just declared war on someone who'd been planning this battle much longer than I had. The roses nodded in the morning breeze, as if they were agreeing that it was time their guardian finally showed some teeth. I walked into the old brick church on Maple, the one that still smells of candle wax and hymn books even on a Monday afternoon, because Pastor Willard had offered me 10 quiet minutes in his office to collect my thoughts. Funny thing is, quiet was the last thing I found. The place was hosting a food drive sorting line for the local shelter, boxes everywhere, volunteers in neon gloves clapping cartons shut like a syncopated choir. Their rubbery thumps echoed off the stained glass windows, and every bang felt like a reminder that my own house might not stand long enough to need donations. Pastor Willard, tall as a lamppost and twice as patient, handed me a cup of lukewarm coffee and said, "Frank, you look like a man being chased by something bigger than himself." I told him in a low growl that something bigger had 4 wheels, a demolition crew, and a woman named Carol Miller riding shotgun. He winced, then glanced toward the nave, where a slim man in a county utility jacket was fiddling with the breaker panel. At that precise second, the lights died, organ pipes sighed, and an electrical pop ricocheted through the rafters like a sniper shot. Volunteers gasped. Canned green beans tumbled from a toppled box, rolling across the tiled aisle in a metallic cascade. The utility man slipped out a side door before anyone could ask questions. I caught only the back of his jacket, county infrastructure, but the gate told me ex-military and on someone's payroll. My payroll, not a chance. Carol's? I'd bet my last rosebush. Back in the parking lot, dusk settling like dust on the hood of my battered Chevy, I found a folded flyer tucked under the wiper. Black letters shouted, "Community Safety Alert, Non-Compliant Property on Pine Street. Proceed with caution." Beneath was a grainy photo of me, nozzle in hand, spliced beside a condemned shack as if we shared the address. I crumpled the paper, heart hammering. Psychological warfare, page 1 of the handbook. Turn the neighborhood against the lone holdout. I started the engine and felt my phone vibrate. Private number, automated voice. Final notice. Your homeowner's insurance is under review for potential cancellation due to increased liability. Press 1 to speak with an agent. I hung up, but the chill stayed. Sarah Johnson's kitchen smelled of cinnamon tea when I arrived. She had 3 monitors glowing like miniature suns across her oak table, gray hair pulled into a loose braid, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "Frank," she said, without looking up, fingers dancing across keys, "your adversary doesn't sleep." Lines of property records scrolled past, shell companies with pleasant names, all branching back to a single trust managed by Carol's brother-in-law. "She's been buying parcels around your block for 18 months. Yours is the last piece to make a perfect rectangle. That rectangle," she tapped the screen, "matches a pre-filed plan for luxury townhouses called Roseview Estates." My gut twisted at the name. My roses, their estate. Sarah clicked open an email from an anonymous account. Blurry surveillance stills of my driveway. Timestamps matching nights I'd heard drones buzzing like angry hornets above the oak tree. Someone was cataloging my routines, the way a hunter tracks a buck before opening day. 2 nights later, Tom Patterson and I returned from the hardware store. He'd insisted on motion lights from my backyard, only to find the garage door hanging off its rollers, padlock snapped like a wishbone, wheelbarrow overturned, tool chest gutted, and every box of family photographs flung across the concrete floor. The air smelled of motor oil and wet cardboard. Tom muttered, "Looks like a message, not a robbery." He was right. The only thing missing was my grandfather's black and chrome Kodak, the camera that had captured generations of Wells family gatherings. On the inner wall, someone had spray painted in red, "History won't save you." The hiss of the paint still lingered, as if the vandal had finished moments before we arrived. I tasted iron on my tongue, part rage, part fear. Morning brought uniformed men in reflective vests, stringing yellow tape across my porch. The lead inspector, cheeks raw from the February wind, declared the structure temporarily uninhabitable pending seismic assessment. Seismic, here, where the biggest shake in living memory was a passing freight train. Bureaucratic terror and high-vis clothing. They handed me a relocation voucher for a budget motel by the interstate and a list of repairs that would bankrupt a man twice my income. I stood silent until the crew left, listening to the wind whistle through the busted porch screen like a kettle left too long on the stove. That night, the utility pole at the corner exploded with a crack that rattled windows. Power died block wide. The street sank into ink-black silence, broken only by the groan of distant backup generators. From my bedroom window, I saw car headlights pause at the intersection. Then a second pair of lights switched off and coasted to a stop opposite my house. 2 silhouettes remained inside, staring. Whether they saw me in the darkness, I couldn't tell, but I felt the heat of their gaze anyway. In the hush, I heard a sound that shouldn't exist in a blackout. The faint electric whir of a drone overhead. Propellers slicing the air like a deck of cards being shuffled by a restless dealer. I spent the powerless hours at the kitchen table with a single candle, Mary's teacup between my palms, memories crowding my mind. I whispered, "Mary, I'm tired, and this fight is bigger than me." The flame bent in the draft, and for a heartbeat, I thought of letting it all go, selling out, moving into a rental, leaving the roses to bulldozers and time. My breath hitched, 2 ragged sentences of doubt that no one but the dark could hear. Then I remembered my grandfather's words. "You don't quit the day before the miracle." I pinched out the candle, got my notebook, and began to plan. The investigation took shape like a jigsaw puzzle with edges made of rumors. Sarah traced utility subcontractors back to a company linked to Miller Realty Holdings. Tom staked out the county equipment yard and photographed the same black BMW arriving after hours, drivers exchanging envelopes with a man we later identified as a junior clerk from the zoning office. Pastor Willard, catalyst in a collar, revealed during lunch at the church soup kitchen that Carol had recently donated a generous sum for a community revitalization fund, money earmarked to landscape a new public park once certain eyesore properties were cleared. Eyesore meant my home, my history. Every piece pointed to a land grab scripted in whispers and executed with official seals. One week in, Sarah deciphered a pattern in the shell company's filings. They all used a courier service called Aeropath Logistics. Aeropath trunks delivered sealed envelopes to the county recorder every Friday at exactly 3:17 p.m. "Nail that courier," Sarah said, and we could glimpse whatever chess move Carol planned next. Tom offered distraction. He knows the driver's sister. I chose infiltration. Thursday evening, I borrowed an oversized reflective vest, smeared a little axle grease across my cheeks, and walked into the Aeropath depot as if I belonged. Nobody questions a man in dirty work clothes carrying a clipboard and muttering about late manifests. I found the Friday envelope, pale blue, heavier than paper alone, addressed to the County Cultural Resources Division. Cultural Resources? My heart hammered. Could she be moving against the roses themselves, claiming they were invasive or diseased? Before I could slip the envelope into my vest, footsteps approached. I ducked behind a steel shelving unit stacked with packages, breathing in the sharp tang of cardboard dust. 2 voices argued about overtime, then faded. I replaced the blue envelope with an identical one Sarah had prepared. Same weight, same label. But inside it contained nothing but a sheet of blank paper and a single dried rose petal. Sarah's idea of poetic sabotage. The real envelope went under my jacket. As I left the depot, the drone of fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the distant rumble of trucks, a mechanical lullaby for desperate men. At Sarah's kitchen table, we opened the envelope. It held a draft ordinance requesting emergency removal of noxious flora at my address, citing public health concerns. Attached were doctored photographs of black spots on rose leaves, grotesquely enlarged. There was also a memo from Carol to a county supervisor promising a generous campaign donation if the ordinance passed without public hearing. Cold anger settled into my bones. She wasn't just taking my land. She was defaming my grandfather's garden. Tom muttered, "That's beyond dirty." Pastor Willard, who had come to bless our impromptu war council with pie, said softly, "At times like these, darkness feels louder than faith. But remember, Frank, snakes bite loudest when they're cornered." Armed with proof yet knowing the county machine would dismiss a complaint from one upset retiree, we needed leverage, not legality. That's when Sarah proposed something bold. Make Carol think the roses really were sick, terminally so, and that destroying them could spread the blight to her own manicured show garden across town. "We give her a nightmare she wrote herself," Sarah said, eyes gleaming behind the monitor glow. Psychological warfare turned inside out. Phase 1 would require an expert, or at least the illusion of one. Tom suggested Dr. Elsie Navarro, a botanist friend who lost her hearing after a lab accident, but communicates fluently in rapid-fire sign language. Dr. Navarro agreed on one condition. We keep actual roses safe. She'd stage a late-night visit, inspect under floodlights, and leave behind technical jargon scary enough to rattle any real estate mogul. Catalyst with a disability. Another unexpected ally. Another card on the table. The focal point scene unfolded 2 nights later, under a hard wind that rattled window casements like dice in a cup. Carol's BMW idled at the curb, engine humming. She stood on my walkway in a trench coat, arms folded, as Dr. Navarro shined a UV lamp on the rose leaves, their veins glowing eerie purple. Navarro signed furiously, and Sarah, posing as interpreter, translated, "Advanced phytophthora infestation. Potential cross-species contamination within 700 feet. Immediate quarantine recommended." Carol's confident posture wavered. She asked, voice tight, "What does that mean for nearby properties?" Sarah replied, "If spores migrate, landscape liabilities could skyrocket. Best practice is containment through specialized care, but removal, if mishandled, spreads spores faster." Carol's eyes darted toward her car, no doubt envisioning legal fallout. She insisted on a follow-up report first thing in the morning. Dr. Navarro nodded, then pressed a gloved finger to lips in a hushed gesture that sent a ripple of unease through Carol's entourage. The turn came faster than we planned. At dawn, I received a certified letter. Temporary seizure of my property by the county under the newly passed Emergency Botanical Hazard Act, an act that hadn't existed 48 hours earlier. Carol hadn't backed off. She'd accelerated, weaponizing our bluff into an excuse for outright theft. A convoy of county trucks rolled up before I finished reading. Workers in hazmat suits stepped out, spraying the air with disinfectant that smelled of bleach and bureaucratic overreach. They cordoned off my yard with orange mesh, staking signs, "Biohazard, entry prohibited." The sight punched the breath from my lungs. Every strategy, every late-night plan had just cornered me into a checkmate of my own making. Sarah's minivan screeched to a halt. She sprinted toward the tape, but 2 deputies blocked her. Tom arrived right behind, yelling that they had no warrant, but hazmat suits don't answer to common sense. Hands shaking, I dialed Pastor Willard. His line went straight to voicemail, church phone dead from the transformer blast still awaiting repair. I watched helpless as a gloved worker uprooted the first rose bush, soil raining from its roots like lost time. In that instant, the real point of no return finally hit me. I'd let Carol escalate this into a biological charade that now painted me as a public menace. By sunset, my house could be flattened under the guise of sanitation, and nobody would lift a finger to stop it. Sarah caught my eye across the tape. Her face, usually calm, now flashed raw fear. Tom squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "We're outflanked, Frank." The word echoed, hollow and final. In the long pause that followed, I felt every year of my life settle on my spine. My internal voice spoke only 3 sentences. I can't lose this ground. I can't let Mary's roses die for a lie. I need a move she'll never see coming. But the board seemed empty of pieces. The county truck's hydraulic arm swung over the beds with a mechanical groan that sounded like a funeral dirge. My breath frosted in the cold air as I searched for anything at all that could turn the tide. Then, as the claw descended toward the second bush, a thought struck like a match in a mine shaft. If Carol fears contamination, what happens when contamination suddenly threatens her own prize-winning garden, the one that lines the driveway of her lakeside mansion? A reckless, desperate seed of an idea took root, wild and dangerous. I didn't know yet how to grow it, but for the first time since the black BMW jumped my curb, I felt the faint hum of possibility. The claw clamped shut, the rosebush snapped, and soil scattered like ash. A piece of my past fell to the ground, and with it, the last of my complacency. I turned away from the devastation, already thinking 3 moves ahead, my heartbeat drumming out a single refrain. "You picked the wrong fight, Carol. Game's not over. Now it's my turn to play dirty." I woke before dawn in the discount motel Carol's seizure order had assigned me to, the hum of the ice machine throbbing through the thin wall like a telltale heart. For the first time in 50 years, I wasn't waking up under my own roof, and the emptiness felt heavier than the army rucksack on my back in '74. I let that weight sit, then whispered into the dark, "Mary, I'm coming home one way or another." By 7, I was at Ramirez Garden Supply, a cramped storefront that smelled of peat moss and fresh oranges. Alejandro Ramirez, a soft-spoken agronomist who'd come north from Oaxaca years ago, stood behind the counter, wiping dew off a stack of clay pots. B3 catalyst in the flesh. He'd heard about my biohazard roses on the Spanish morning news and shook his head in quiet disbelief. I slid a folded sheet across the counter. Navarro's notes on a completely harmless algal stain that turns leaves midnight blue under UV light. I said, "Alejandro, can you brew me a gallon by tonight?" His eyebrows climbed, then he smiled the way a craftsman smiles at an interesting problem. He said, "For you, viejo, 1 gallon and a prayer." Dusk found Tom and me in the abandoned bus depot on Harbor Avenue. A5 transport ticked, testing Carol's own drone we'd liberated from her surveillance nest last week. Propellers coughed to life, blades scissoring the stale air. The echo clacked against the steel rafters like distant applause. I taped 2 small canisters of the algal mix beneath the fuselage, each fitted with a pressure sprayer rigged to my phone. Tom whistled low. "That little bird's about to carry a world of trouble," I replied. "Trouble's already here. I'm just returning the favor." Midnight, lakefront. Carol's mansion rose out of the darkness, windows glowing amber behind manicured hedges. Her prize roses lined the circular drive, trimmed into perfect cones like royal guards. I launched the drone from the public boat dock, its rotors a soft wasp buzz over the water. The screen on my phone showed night vision green. Crosshairs settled over the first bed. I thumbed the release, watched a silver mist descend, and thought of incense and church, holy and damning at once. 2 passes later, every leaf carried a whisper of blue. Phase 1 done. Phase 2 required patience. At dawn, I drove back to my house, still ringed in orange mesh, deputies posted like statues. I stepped into the street, shoulders slumped, and announced loud enough for body cams to catch. "Gentlemen, I concede. You win. I'll sign whatever." Vremenaya capituliatia, as my Russian drill sergeant once barked, a temporary surrender. They relaxed. One even offered a styrofoam cup of coffee. Across town, Carol must have seen the same feed, because 15 minutes later, her BMW rolled past the barricade. She didn't even glance at me, just flashed a victorious smile and sped home to celebrate. Celebration didn't last. By noon, Sarah's scanners lit up. Frantic calls from Carol to 3 landscaping firms, then to County Environmental Health, then, deliciously, to Dr. Navarro herself. Blue-veined leaves had appeared on her award winners overnight. She demanded an emergency pesticide treatment, no questions asked. Navarro, stone-faced on video relay, warned that the wrong chemical could oxidize the algae into a necrotic agent capable of defoliating an area roughly the size of Roseview Estates. Carol ordered the most aggressive compound on the market and scheduled application for that afternoon. We knew because Tom, disguised in a rental yard polo, drove the tanker truck. At 3 p.m., a dry winter wind kicked up from the lake, C1 weather factor, whipping the chemical mist off Carol's roses and across her fountain courtyard, bleaching petunias, singeing ivy, staining marble statues a sickly orange. Security cameras captured her screaming at workers to keep spraying. 20 minutes later, the county hazmat hotline logged 6 neighbor complaints about toxic cloud drift. At 4:07, an inspector from Environmental Health, real this time, not Navarro in costume, ordered an immediate shutdown of all landscaping activity on the property and a full soil remediation assessment. Estimated cost, low 6 figures, payable before any sale or development could proceed. Economic strike delivered. While Carol wrangled with inspectors, I put Phase 3 in motion. Alejandro had friends in Aeropath Logistics, the same courier that ferried her bribes. They owed him favors. Years ago, he'd saved their avocado trees from root rot. Friday at exactly 3:17, Aeropath refused pickup of any parcel originating from Miller Realty Holdings, citing contamination risk. Suppliers followed suit. Insurance flagged the mansion as high liability, and Carol's lenders froze her construction line of credit pending environmental clearance. Dry blockade, Category B resource hit. Evening fell over Pine Street. Deputies removed the mesh from my yard, so hazmat trucks could finish uprooting what roses remained. I stepped onto the porch and asked the supervisor for a moment alone. He hesitated. Protocol, but the weariness in my voice must have sounded safe enough. I knelt in the churned soil, found one broken stem with a single tight bud, and placed it in my grandfather's brass nozzle like a makeshift vase. Inner monologue. Losing the garden hurts, Frank, but losing the fight would hurt worse. A gust rattled the empty beds. The faint scent of bleach hovered like regret. Price of victory announced itself. The original roses were gone. Saturday dawn, pale and brittle. Carol arrived with a private security escort, her white suit traded for mud-spattered field gear. She marched up my torn walkway past bulldozer tracks and said, with a tremor under the steel, "Frank, call off your circus. These theatrics are ruining both of us." I kept my voice level. "Didn't pick the fight, Carol. Just learned your steps." She offered a buyout again, higher, desperate, but I shook my head. That's when I played the final card, Category G moral trap, fused with Category Y mirror tactic. I extended the single bud in the brass nozzle and said, "This is what's left of history after greed takes a chainsaw to it. I forgive you for mine. Can you forgive yourself for yours?" The question wasn't a trick, it was a mirror. She recoiled like I'd slapped her, because forgiveness from the man she tried to crush left her no villain to blame but the one in her mirror. Security escorted her back to the BMW. She paused, shouted over her shoulder, "You've poisoned my life, old man." I answered softly, "Not poison, Carol. Just showed you the cost of your own shortcuts." She drove off, tires spitting gravel, into a future of lawyers and remediation bills that would keep Roseview Estates a PowerPoint fantasy. By New Year's Eve, the county lifted the seizure order, too expensive to maintain a site no longer deemed hazardous after third-party tests. I brought in fresh topsoil, planted cuttings Alejandro propagated from the single bud. Takes years for roses to grow, but I'm patient. Tom replaced the porch braces, Sarah rewired the motion lights, and Navarro left a sealed envelope of blue-stained leaves on my mantel, souvenir of a war won with brains over bulldozers. One January afternoon, Pastor Willard stopped by, found me kneeling in the frost, coaxing new plants into the reborn bed. He asked, "Worth the fight?" I stood, knees creaking, and answered, "A man's roots aren't in the ground, Pastor. They're in the choices he refuses to uproot." He nodded, eyes shining like stained glass in the sun. I lost the original roses, a slice of savings, and whatever taste I had for quiet retirement. In return, I gained a tougher hide, a band of unlikely friends, and proof that experience still trumps arrogance. Mary's wind chimes rang on the porch. I swear the notes sounded like applause. Before he left, Pastor Willard pressed a small card into my palm. Printed on it, in his neat handwriting, was a single line: "Courage is a garden, tend it daily." I slid the card into my wallet next to a photo of Mary smiling among the roses that once were, and walked back to the house I nearly lost, ready to guard whatever grows here next.